What is up, Pauper players? Welcome back to another Salt and Pauper Saturday video, and today we're jumping right in. Today we are finally answering the question, where should Judge's Familiar see play in Pauper? This card was recently downshifted with Ravnica Remastered. It is a 1/1 flyer for 1 blue or white hybrid, and it allows you to sacrifice it to counter target instant or sorcery unless its controller pays 1. It is effectively a Merfolk Curse Catcher of sorts. But while everyone can agree that it's good, no one can seem to agree where it should go, and as of yet, it has really struggled to put up a finish in a challenge or a significant tournament as part of a meta deck. So we are going to run through every meta deck that I could think of to slam this card into, and we're going to see where it feels best. We are going to be skipping the deck text because if we do that, this video is going to take forever. So I will pause on each deck text screen right before we jump into that feature match to let you guys screenshot if you would like to take a look at the list we're going to be using. This is the first list. We're going to kick it off with Coggates. Let's jump into the game. All right, for game number 1, we are going to be playing against Amio or Amio, hard to tell, but we win the die roll, so we are going to kick things off. We are on the play. We see several gates. We see a Basilisk Gate. We see Sacred Cat, Journey to Nowhere, Modern Age. This seems like an okay hand to kick things off, so we're going to jump right in. Opponent starts off on a Swamp. And we're just going to lead with a Sacred Cat here. Opponent has a Satyr Wayfinder to mill a whole bunch of cards. We're going to cycle Lorraine Reveal to get a Contaminated Aquifer. We're just going to drop the Basilisk Gate and pump, swing in for 4, start to out life gain. This deck does usually run Lotleth Troll as a finisher, so it does have big burst potential. We're just going to do our best to kind of out life gain that deck. Going up to 29 here. Preordains for a counterspell. Opponent lands a Crawling Infestation early, which is a little unfortunate. Would have liked to have a counterspell open for that. They are really filling up their graveyard quickly. 13 cards in there currently. But no Lotleth Troll, or no Lotleth Giant yet. Opponent attempts to bring creatures back. Ooh. Opponent lands a Tortured Existence here, which is pretty brutal, as well as a second Crawling Infestation. So they are going to have a lot of recursion in this match. We are going to have to take it long. Just need to focus here on out life gaining their damage, and we should still be okay. We have Prismatic Strands in the graveyard, which is pretty nice for us here. Unfortunately, Fume Spitter is rather heartbreaking since it's going to kill our Sacred Cat. We do hit a second Basilisk Gate, which is pretty nice. We're going to go ahead and Squadron Hawk up. Summon the squad here. And unfortunately, this Fume Spitter does slow us down pretty strongly, so we're going to go ahead and just pass the turn here with Counterspell mana up. Next turn, ideally, we can swing in with that Basilisk Gate. We have double triggers here, so we can force the use of the Fume Spitter and then pump something else. Opponent just going to swing. Takes us back down to 20 here. Those insects are stacking up pretty quickly, but this deck does have Suffocating Fumes in it, so just trying to draw to one of those. Opponent has a Grave Scrabbler here. And goes for a Crypt Rats. We're going to have to counter that. If that gets onto the board, we're just going to have a whole bunch of problems. Especially if they have something to pump it. If they manage to get a 1 counter or something on it, we're going to have a big problem. We do go ahead and swing in for 7 here. Gain some of that life back. And we're going to play a couple flyer threats. And see if we can't push through lethal with this double Basilisk Gate draw here. Flyers are definitely just going to be able to swing right in above a bunch of their bugs, and we are at a very healthy life total of 20. Opponent has 16 cards, creature cards in the graveyard, though, so we do have to be careful. We use a Prismatic Strands here to preserve our life total. Unfortunately, opponent has double Dread Return here for a Lotleth Giant, then a Generous Ent, then another Lotleth Giant. That is going to lethal us, which is unfortunate. Should have just kept that Prismatic Strands. Didn't really think the opponent could lethal us with double triggers, but unfortunately, we just kind of got there. That's on me, not on the deck. But let's move on to game number 2. All right, game number 2, we are on the play. Sideboard plan, we took out our Journey to Nowheres here. Otherwise, not a ton of huge changes, just bringing in some graveyard hate and some enchantment hate. Otherwise, we are ready to go. And this seems like a reasonable keep to me, so we're going to go ahead and drop a gate. Second gate, leading into this Basilisk Gate once again, drop a Judge's Familiar, which does prevent the opponent from being able to turn 3 his enchantment, which is really nice for that Crawling Infestation. We do get to blink for 1 here. Opponent does go for the Crawling Infestation. Unfortunately, we have the Dawnbringer Cleric, so even though they go for it in the face of a Judge's Familiar, we have the answer and can continue the pressure. They then go for a Tortured Existence. Little bit unfortunate. Would have rather used the Familiar on the Crawling Infestation and then save the Dawnbringers for the Tortured Existence, but not too bad. We're just going to Basilisk Gate this Judge's Familiar here and beat in for 4. Really going to start to put a clock on the opponent. They're going to go ahead and do some Tortured Existence shenanigans. We're going to go ahead and Brainstorm. That'll show us Relic and Prismatic Strands, which is very, very good here. Opponent does have a Caustic Caterpillar, but a single Relic activation is pretty strong. Opponent at 0 cards in hand, or 0 creatures in graveyard. We do have a Prismatic Strand in our hands, though, so we definitely have a nice, strong board presence. We're going to land this Guardian of the Guild Pact, which is a very strong lethal threat against the opponent. There's not a whole lot they can do against it. We're just going to pump this Guardian, swing in at a very comfortable 19. The opponent has no creatures, and we have a Relic up to prevent any shenanigans. Opponent does pop the Caustic Caterpillar. We're just going to sacrifice it to exile both yards. We kept the Prismatic Strands in hand, which is even better, because if they try to go for it, we're just going to be able to get it done. Hitting with the Guardian here, closing out this game, opponent down to 3. Not a whole lot they can do here, and the opponent scoops it up. We are off to game number 3. Game number 3, we are on the draw here. And we see another decent hand. We have double land into Squadron Hawk with a Judge's Familiar and a Brainstorm, so we're definitely going to keep it. Squadron Hawk, Brainstorm, a very strong combo. We hit another gate, which is nice. Just going to go ahead and lead off. Opponent starts with a Generous Ent. We're going to play a Sacred Cat. Opponent has the Crawling Infestation, which is unfortunate. If we would have played Judge's Familiar there, we would have been able to avoid that. Probably should have led it on the Judge's Familiar, but we do have Counterspell for the second Crawling Infestation, so at least we slow down the opponent a little bit. We hit a Prismatic Strands, which is a very strong lead here. We are going to Squadron Hawk. And we do have Brainstorm for the Squadron Hawk, but we're going to lead on a Judge's Familiar just to ensure that they don't have any shenanigans. Opponent has a Stinkweed Imp here to slow down our Aerial Assault. We are going to Brainstorm, put some of these Squadron Hawks back. And then we'll Squadron Hawk to draw those cards again. So Brainstorm, absolutely incredible with Squadron Hawk. We're going to Preordain to show us a Relic, which is very good for us here. Time is getting a little bit low. It is currently 10 minutes to 10 minutes, so not too bad of a concern, but this game does go the distance. Time is going to be important, so go ahead and make sure you're keeping an eye on the time. Opponent is also just clogging up the board here. We're going to go ahead and drop this relic and continue to pass through, just trying to get to a point where we can hit a Basilisk Gate and really present a threat. We're going to go ahead and exile the graveyard with the relic and then Prismatic Strands and then block up a bunch of creatures. Now, realistically, we should have blocked the creatures, then popped the relic. But we didn't want the Prismatic Strands to be exiled with the relic, so we had to do it that way. We're going to go ahead and Lorien revealed here. Doesn't really show us what we want. Still just desperately digging for a Basilisk Gate here. Really need to hit a Basilisk Gate as a payoff, and then we are in pretty good. Opponent hits a Flesh Bag. We're just going to sack off one of these Squadron Hawks. Probably should have sacrificed a Sacred Cat, but not to worry. We have our Guardian here. Still, once again, we just need a gate. Once we hit a Basilisk Gate, we are in very good here. It's going to be the theme. You can see we are down to 6 minutes each now, or 6.5 minutes each here. Really starting to get down to the wire. Time is a concern. Opponent went for a Urborg repossession, targeting their Centaur. Their Battlefield Scrounger, the Centaur. And we were able to counterspell it and then exile both. Or at least exile the Scrounger with the Dawnbreaker Cleric. So, able to stop the opponent from having an anti-mill threat. Under 5 minutes now. Really starting to speed up the play. We just go for a Dawnbringer Cleric on the Tortured Existence to stop the recursion. We're forcing the opponent to mill themselves down. The opponent is down to 14 cards, now down to 10 cards, now down to 9 cards. But time pressure is definitely a factor. We are both under 4 minutes. Gonna go ahead and exile that Lotleth Giant just to make sure that the opponent can't do any surprise lethals. We are at 9 here, but we are starting to stabilize with this Prismatic Strands up. Still waiting to hit a Basilisk Gate here. It's been a big problem. We're going to go ahead and Prismatic Strands and then block out to trade off some of the opponent's board. Opponent has a Spore Frog, though, to slow us down, so it doesn't look like we're going to be able to get it done through combat. Opponent down to 6 cards now, so really just getting to a point where we need to outlast them on time for them to draw out. Down to 2 minutes, 45 seconds. We're going to flash back to Prismatic Strands in the upkeep so that we can go ahead and pass through the turn. This is just a time-saving technique. Opponent just passes back. We have the counterspell up. We're going to go ahead and swing in the air. This is an attack for 6, so we are putting some pressure on the opponent. If we hit a Basilisk Gate, it is lethal, so they're going to have to pop the Spore Frog at some point. Opponent down to 5 cards in deck, but 2 minutes each. Really, really coming down to the wire here. And time pressure is definitely getting the best of us. Not the cleanest play, but when you're playing under time pressure and playing very, very quickly, it's easy to make small mistakes here and there that do add up. Opponent down to 5 here. We're going to go ahead and once again upkeep Prismatic Strands. We're just going to block and take 1, go to 8. Opponent has another Stinkweed Imp. We're going to Brainstorm. And we have the Counterspell up and the Annul. We're going to play a Sacred Cat here. This should give us the life lead. We're just going to attack for 4. We're going to put the opponent down to 3. 3 cards left in library. We wanted to hold back blockers for the Troll of Khazad-dûm because we don't have any additional Prismatic Strands in hand. So we're just going to block out on this Troll of Khazad-dûm here. We're going to go down to 4 because of life gain from Sacred Cat. Unfortunately, the opponent has a Dread Return for the Lotleth Giant with 6 creatures. We have the counter spell in hand, but because I had passed priority due to time, because we are under a minute at 58 seconds here. Unfortunately, it resolves, and we lose the match there. But a very strong showing for Coggates, kind of going the distance in a full 3 games here against the self-mill deck. Battle of the mid-ranges, but unfortunately we just never found a Basilisk Gate, and that is kind of the name of the deck. And without it, we don't have a whole lot of finishing power, so we are left just a little bit short. Unfortunate way to finish it out, but let's move on to the next deck. Alright guys, the next deck up is going to be Mono Blue Fairies featuring Judge's Familiar. I will pause to let you guys take a look at the deck list here, and we are going to jump into this feature game. Alright, game number 1, we win the die roll, so we are on the play against Said Gomez. Let's go ahead and kick things off. This is a reasonable hand, so we're going to start things off. Opponent looks like he is playing either Mono Red Goblins or Koldatha Red. We're going to lead on a Fairy Seer. Opponent has a Goblin, but shows us a red-black land, so it looks like he is on some sort of a red-black burn or red-black sacrifice list, running at least some number of artifacts. We're going to get in with a Ninja. We have a Spell Stutter up. Opponent does play into it with a Goblin Tomb Raider, so we're going to go ahead and counter that just to get some of that extra damage off the board. Those do stack up pretty quick. Opponent has a Bullet for our face, putting us down to 9, which is pretty hard to deal with. We do have a Brine Barrow Intruder, which is pretty strong here. We're going to leave our Circuit Hacker up to block with. And we have a Judge's Familiar to help us even if we go shields down. So we're going to go ahead and Brine Barrow and then double block. Opponent does have a Deadly Dispute, so we're going to sacrifice the Judge's Familiar to counter it just to deny the opponent's cards. We're going to put a Spell Stutter back on top and then draw into it with an Of One Mind. And then we're going to go ahead and hit the opponent for 1 just to start things off. We are still at 9, so we do have to stabilize. We're just going to trade off the Ninja here. Opponent has a Galv Blast to stop us from trading. But we have a Spell Stutter to stop that. The opponent has another burn spell. We unfortunately have to let it die, but they do not, so we get the trade. We're going to lead on another Judge's Familiar. Swing for 2. And start to plink down the opponent here, aiming to just trade off with probably the Fairy Seer. Opponent is going to Alms of the Vein, but we have a Spell Pierce. Opponent did not play the land first and got punished for it. Might have just drawn it, though. And then opponent has a Gal Blast. We're going to counterspell. And at this point, we just kind of start ninjutsuing ninjas for Spell Stutters and holding Spell Stutter to counter a spell. Opponent is on top deck mode, so we have a lot of play here. Unfortunately, Kitchen Imp is not something that we can counter with a Spell Stutter sprite, so we have to let that resolve. He's going to go ahead and attack. We're going to go down to 6 here. Opponent has 1 card in hand we need to be aware of, but we're going to draw with a Ninja. And then we're going to play a Judge's Familiar so we can double block if we need to. Opponent does give us the opportunity to double block. We are going to take it, have Spell Stutter and Spell Pierce up, so definitely one we're okay with. Opponent goes for a Deadly. We're going to Spell Stutter it just to starve them off of resources. We have the Spell Pierce. And then once again, we are going to Ninja a Spell Stutter to ensure that we can keep this game locked down here. And keep drawing through while we put our opponent down to 4. We have another Ninja in hand, which is great for us. It means we can keep the train running, but the opponent scoops it up. Nothing they can do. All right, game number 2 against Said Gomez. We are on the draw. We won game 1. As far as sideboard, we don't actually sideboard anything in this matchup. That we didn't see a ton, and Blue Elemental Blast doesn't have as much relevancy against the Blue-Black Madness deck, strictly, or the Black-Red Magnus deck, strictly because a lot of their burn and draw is black, so we don't want to take out our counterspells that can hit black targets for counterspells that can't. Otherwise, we're just going to run the deck exactly the same. We hit a 1-mana hand into a 1-mana hand, but the second 1-mana hand has a Fairy Seer, so we're going to keep it. We do top deck a Moon Circuit Hacker, which is pretty clutch. We just scry a land on top, and we're going to start to draw ourselves out. Opponent has a very slow start, just leading with land and nothing into a Rakdos Carnarium, which is great for us. It's going to give us all the time in the world. We are going to go ahead and Moon Circuit Hacker to draw a card, and then Fairy Seer again. Really just trying to make sure that we smooth out our draws and hit these land drops to draw our way out of a 1-land keep. We are well on our way to do that. Opponent has a Voldaren Epicure into a Tithing Blade. We are going to just go ahead and sack the Ninja. It's kind of done its job, and we don't really want to be discarding, so we're just going to attack for 1 here. We're going to Ninja this one. Looking for another land drop. Unfortunately, we don't get it, but we just reuse the Fairy Seer for a 3rd time. No land on top, but that's okay. 3 should be enough to get the job done now that we have a human and a non-human. For Of One Mind, opponent is just going to Faithless Looting, and we're going to draw some cards, and the opponent scoops it up. Looks like the opponent just wasn't ready to play through a fully stocked blue hand with 2 cards left, which is funny because we didn't even hit the land, but boy did we have the gas. At the end of the day, this deck felt very good. The Judge's Familiar edition did seem meaningful. Realistically, all I did was cut Fairy Miscreant for it, so very clean 1-for-1. Slightly less powerful Spell Stutter sprites, but at the end of the day, 2 mana is really all you need most often, sometimes 3, so it seems like, 10 fairies was enough to achieve that, and really liked the Judge Familiars as kind of additional counter options. They did definitely pressure the opponent's mana base, so felt very, very strong there. Let's go to the next deck. All right, this is the next deck up. We are playing White Weenie featuring Judge's Familiar. I will pause right here for you to take a screenshot if you would like a picture of the deck. And let's jump into the feature match for Mono White featuring Judge's Familiar. Alrighty guys, unfortunately for the last deck we were going to feature, it's Mono White Weenie, but all of my playbacks are erroring out or corrupted for some reason. Not 100% sure why. They just sort of show the empty playback board and let the time tick down. We have seen this error previously in one other video, but it was based on a flicker issue. And that wasn't really the case in any of the matches I played with the white decks. So not 100% sure why the playback would be that way in this case. But to give you a synopsis of how things went, the deck played pretty well. Ultimately, I don't think the Judge's Familiar added much to this deck. That's really the only takeaway. I felt like the deck was okay, the Judge's Familiar was okay, but it didn't really make it any better. Alright, the last deck we are going to be playing is going to be the Mono Blue Terror, Mono Blue Delver, featuring Judge's Familiar to see how they're doing. Ultimately, I wasn't super hopeful about this card in this deck. It just feels like it's going to be a little bit counterintuitive for what the deck is looking to achieve. But let's give it a try and see what it feels like. All right, we lose the die roll, so we are on the draw. And this is certainly a keepable hand, so off we go. We're going to lead on a Delver and just see what happens. We have a Judge Familiar. Definitely could have led on Judge's Familiar here, but the opponent just cycles a Troll and plays another tap land. Shows us blue-black land, so could definitely be on blue-black Fae. We do get a natural Delver flip, which is fantastic, and then we're just going to play a Judge's Familiar after brainstorming. Could have played the second Delver to ensure we get a double flip, but thought the likelihood of the opponent playing something on that turn was pretty high. They did have an Exhume, but unfortunately played around the Judge's Familiar. And then show us a Merfolk's Secret Keeper, so they are on some sort of a Demur Reanimator or a Demur Mill deck. We do see a Volatile Ford, so we do see that they are now on Grixis, so this looks to be Grixis Reanimator. We're going to start cycling through a whole bunch of cantrips. We have a double flip Delver, so we're just going to keep swinging. Opponent is at 2, so the clock is real. And we have double Judge's Familiar up. Opponent is not able to race us because we do have lethal here. And that is all she wrote. Off to game number 2, thanks to Judge's Familiar. All right, game number 2 against Minato Kenku. We take out some deep analyses here for some relics, but otherwise not a whole lot of other changes, just trying to minimize the opponent's aggression. Otherwise, we just run it as is, so let's kick it off. We are on the draw. This is certainly a keepable hand, although it doesn't have any creatures, so we're definitely going to be on the slower side. We hit a Murmuring Mystic, which is pretty promising. That's definitely going to be the way we win this game. Opponent has an Archaeologist. None of this is providing any meaningful pressure. We're really just holding up Counterspell, Snap, and Boomerang to make sure that the opponent can't land an early troll on us and race us before we can get this Murmuring Mystic online. Opponent casts an Exhume, but we have a Tolarian Terror in the graveyard thanks to our own self-mill. So we get something back too, and then we go ahead and just snap the troll back to the opponent's hand and beat for 5. We're going to play a Delver here. Now we could have played Murmuring Mystic there and just played a Mental Note to cash in for a bird and hope they can't kill it, but I'd rather wait for one more turn to play it with Counterspell backup, which turns out being the right play. Opponent plays a Stinkweed Imp. Once they go to cycle, we know that they can't do anything else on their turn. We're just going to bounce the Stinkweed so we can continue to beat with the Tolarian Terror. We're going to start cashing in on bird tokens now and play a Judge's Familiar just as extra backup. We do have a Spell Pierce and a Counterspell, so we have all the counter magic in the world. This Murmuring Mystic is definitely going to get the job done. Anybody else see this visual bug on these bird tokens? This is tripping me out. Fortunately, the opponent is just about gone, and that takes the game. At the end of the day, the best deck to play Judge's Familiar in, for my money, is Fae. I think this deck was considerably better with Judge's Familiar in it. I think that it's a small change, but it makes a big impact. And ultimately, I don't think that Fairy Miscreant is the card that we need in that spot anymore. We don't need that many fairies. We just need humans and non-humans to turn on our of one minds and make sure our spell stutter sprites can hit removal spells, which are all basically 1s and 2s these days. So I think this list is about as good as I want it to be, and I'm very happy with it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. As usual, guys, let me know down below if there's a different deck that you want me to try Judge's Familiar in, or if you've found a brew for Judge's Familiar that hasn't really gone onto the radar yet. Let me know down below. Shoot me a Mossfield link or something. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. As usual, guys, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye forever, unless I see you next time. Peace.